All right, welcome back to another great episode of Dr. J Radio Live. Of course, I'm your host, Dr. J, broadcasting from the City of Angels. Or is it? How about City of Madmen, City of Dead, City of Crazies, whatever you want to call it. Friends, I'm always welcome to the idea and open to the idea that you want to send to me. Now, today we have a very special guest. Not only is he very cool and knows a lot, I love guests that have so much knowledge on so many different topics. We're going to be talking about UFOs, time travel, ghosts, and more than that. Actually, I'm going to let the guest, I'm going to introduce him, I'm going to let him tell us a little about himself, unless you've already read it on my website. Without further ado, let me introduce the one and only Mr. Jason Offutt. Jason, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me on. It did, we were kind of back and forth on scheduling for the longest time. I'm glad we finally got this worked out.
Yeah, I know, me too. I like I said, the reason why folks out there paying attention to this, the reason why we started so late is I just had a blast talking to Jason for the last 10 minutes about stuff before we started broadcasting, and we have a lot of the same interests aligned. Let's just put it that way. Anyhow, Jason, let me ask you about how did you get involved in the paranormal?
Well, I got involved in the paranormal more through science fiction and horror movies, I think, than anything else. As a kid, I got wrapped up in Star Trek. They played Lost in Space at the same time that they played Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. So I never saw one episode of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood.
Yeah.
Right. Scooby-Doo was my favorite cartoon. So I had this interest anyway. And then, and it was even, when they pass out the, what is that, Scholastic Book Club order form in schools, in elementary school. And I was always picking.
I remember that.
Yeah, I was picking books on the Loch Ness Monster and Bigfoot and, Yeti. That's what I wanted to read about. I didn't want to read biographies on baseball players. But then something happened when I was about 8, 9, or 10 years old. I was in my house, which was a converted schoolhouse from a schoolhouse. I was about 120 years old at the time. And I walked out from my bedroom into a hallway right across from my door. And that's where we kept all our bookshelves. And there was somebody in there who shouldn't be. I mean, this was out. I lived this building was on a farm, and we were miles away from anybody. So there shouldn't have been this 6-year-old boy standing in my hallway staring at me. And I could still see him in my head. It was a really shocking thing. He had brown hair parted on the right side, blue flannel shirt and blue jeans, and I could see the bookshelf through this kid.
An apparition.
I stood there and stared at him, and it seemed like 20 minutes, but it was probably 15 seconds that we were standing there staring at each other, and then the apparition blinked.
Do you think that the clothes that the boy was wearing were from a different time period, say 50 or 100 years ago, or did it look like a ghost that had recently passed away, say in the last 10, 15 years prior to you seeing it?
Well, that's the thing. That type of clothes could have been on a farm kid, anywhere in the last 80 years from when I saw him. Flannel and denim pants. So I really don't know.
Do you think that the kid was looking back at you in amazement the way you were looking at him, kind of caught off guard?
A bit. I mean, there wasn't really that much expression. There wasn't any shock. It was just no smile, no. I mean, it was just a flat, expressionless mouth. And like I said, he blinked. He could have been in the same shock I was in for seeing him. This could have been. It might not have been an apparition. I'm really, really big. Into time slips. I've interviewed a number of people who've had what they're pretty sure, and I'm pretty sure, are time slips. I mean, this kid could have stepped partially into my time from 40 years before.
That's exactly what I was getting to. It falling into a time slip. There was a series released by Time magazine in the 80s, and it was one of those things where you buy at this grocery store like the first volume for like $1, $2, and then you order the rest 1 month at a time. I only got the one because it was $1 or $2. They were talking about, it was in the late 1800s in the Western era, there was a cowboy walking in one direction, actually riding his horse in one direction, and he came upon a road where he saw another being dressed in clothing that he estimated to be at least 100 years prior to his time. He looked at that being the same way as that being looked at him in amazement, like he crossed into some sort of time loop and saw him there.
Right, and there are I have never read that one, but I've read something similar about the expressions on people. A guy, this was maybe back in the 90s, was driving on a country road, and there was an old-fashioned car that was coming at him, and he was like, "Oh, that's a great-looking car." And as it passed, the people in the car were dressed, like they were from the 1940s or 1950s, and the expression on their face was of total shock. And it went by them, and the guy looked in his rearview mirror, and the car wasn't there anymore. So I don't think that's something that, an apparition per se would do, but a time slip of somebody from the 1940s, seeing a brand new Mustang or whatever the guy was driving would shock them.
Yeah, I would think so. There's a question for you in the chat here already. Let me read it to you. This is from Lasha Senya, which I know you know the name. Is there any way that it was Jason but a version of him from the past? Did the boy look like him at all? Is it an early version of yourself?
Wow, you know what? That is a great question that I've never pondered. No, because when I was that age, when I was about 9 or 10, I had brown hair, and I still do. What hair I've got left. But when I was about 6, I had almost white hair. My hair was so blonde. So that wasn't me, but my father and his brother and sisters went to school in that house. And after the schools got consolidated, his family lived there. Hell, that could have been my dad. It could have been. Yeah.
Now, in your childhood, you were also looking outside for footprints of Bigfoot, right?
All right, yeah, because I've always been a reader, and my family, my folks were really big on newspapers. We got we lived near Kansas City, and we got Kansas City had a morning paper and an evening paper, and we got both, and I read both. I mean, I started with the comics section first, but yeah. But I noticed one day a story in the A section, buried on a Bigfoot sighting in Louisiana, Missouri, which is over on the opposite side of the state between Hannibal and St. Louis. And it was a Bigfoot sighting in my state. And that fascinated me, and I couldn't wait to get the next issue of the paper to see if there was an update. And over the next couple of weeks, there were updates on this Bigfoot creature that had been dubbed Momo. That stands for Missouri Monster.
Oh, okay. Thank you for answering that. I was just about to ask that.
Yeah.
Because I know that they have regional names. For instance, if it's Florida, they call it the skunk ape, right? If it's in the Alps, is it the Alps? Wherever they call it the Sasquatch.
The Himalayas.
There we go.
The Himalayas, it's the Yeti, and the Pacific Northwest, it's Sasquatch. In Ohio, they call it the Grass Man. There's regional names all over the place. But yeah, this was a Bigfoot, and it was in the early 70s, and that's there was Bigfoot mania going around. It was a couple of years before the Legend of Boggy Creek movie came out, but it was really, really big, and I was fascinated. I wanted to go find Bigfoot, so I would leave. This was during the summer. I would just leave and go out into the cornfields, walking around looking for Bigfoot, footprints. My mom was pissed.
I would think so. Yeah, worrying about her child being, not at home. Where did he go?
Yeah, well, I was just looking for Bigfoot, Mom. Got any food? Yeah.
Did your parents ever try to dissuade any of this, or were they supportive of, your endeavors?
That's my father was well, he was an educated guy. Given the when he went to college, that was and that he grew up on a farm. That's not usually what people did then. But he was also very very practical, and he didn't believe in ghosts or Bigfoot, UFOs, any of that. Didn't want to have anything to do with it. My mother, on the other hand, although she wasn't really interested and had never had any experiences, knew that I was interested and, supported that interest because she always felt that these things could happen. She didn't think necessarily they did, but they could. So I did get support from at least one of my parents.
Now, let me ask about something else that happened. I believe earlier you said when you were about 14 years old when you saw something in the sky?
Right. Yeah, I was about 14 or 15, and it was. I don't remember if it was. No, I do remember now. It was planting season. It was either. I was thinking it was either planting or harvesting, but now I'm positive it was planting season. So it was early in the spring, and my dad would always he'd always be out late because you plant. You plant until you get everything in the ground. And we heard his truck come home. It was dark, so it was probably around 9:30, and we heard the truck come in, but he didn't come inside. And Mom sent me outside, so I went outside, and he was just leaning against the side of his truck. And I asked him what was going on, and he just asked me to shush. And he said, "Do you hear that?" And it was a hum. There was a hum in the air, and he pointed at this in the sky. At this above this field that was in between us and a house about a mile or so away, and there was just stars everywhere except for this one spot. It looked like a paper punch that had just punched a black hole in the sky, and we stood there watching it. And eventually, Mom came out, and all three of us saw this. And what was really really impactful to me is the phone rang. And of course, I didn't want to go inside, but since I was the kid, my folks made me go inside and answer the phone. And it was our neighbor from across the field asking if we could see and hear this thing that was in the sky.
Corroborating witness.
Yes, yeah, I know. That's what. As I got older, I realized, man, that phone call was really damn important. So yeah, we saw this, and my dad and I eventually stood out there and watched some more until it got smaller and smaller and higher, and we couldn't hear the hum anymore, and then it just finally vanished.
Now, a lot of people, this is a more recent phenomenon, right? Now, I don't think this was something that was being talked about in the 40s, 50s, 60s, maybe even 70s, is that these craft, because you see a lot more in movies talking about time travel. And of course, if we look at Einstein's equations about gravity, that gravity can affect the space-time continuum, and therefore, if something is using gravity as a form of transportation of moving around, right, then by default it is also a time machine. So hence, a lot of these craft could very well also be time machines. What do you say about that?
Well, the thing is, man, I've interviewed lots of people for articles and books that I've written, and I've listened to quite a few interviews with people on podcasts, and a lot of people, they're certain they know what it is. UFOs are nuts and bolts craft and it's fallen out of favor now, from a different galaxy. Other people are like, no, they're like crypto-terrestrials or ultra-terrestrials, what you want to call them. They're from here, or they're time travelers, or they're from another dimension. And a lot of these people seem certain that they're right, which means they don't know what they're talking about. Because until we have one of these taken apart, one of these craft, and we're able to, interrogate the pilot, I can't offer an explanation. However, I can say everything's on the table. Are these things from our future? Do we look like the Greys in 3,000 years? Evolutionary, yeah, we could.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I've always speculated that it could very well be us. Okay, let me tell you a couple of reasons why. First of all, let's just say we had a nuclear war for multiple nations, and we made Earth uninhabitable at the surface. What would we do? Would we move underground? Okay, so then we don't have sunlight beaming on us, and therefore our skin would end up being more pale. Our eyes would get bigger to adjust to see in the dark. Our brains would be bigger because we would have more intelligence over time, and because our brains would have more power, we wouldn't need to use our muscles as much if we had intelligence and technology. So I always thought that could be a viable explanation, especially when they talk about ETs possibly coming from T plus 54,000 years or T plus 48,000 years. I think it very well could be us if we followed on the timeline where we had nuclear obliteration.
Well, right. Now let me throw one more in there that, I mean, these things are described as generally walking in sort of a shuffling gait. Maybe the tunnels are small.
Yeah, true.
Maybe, yeah, that's part of it. I mean, yeah, and why wouldn't that make sense? That they are time travelers.
I think it very much absolutely is something that we have to consider because, like you said, until we actually interrogate one of these ETs flying around, we're not going to really get anywhere. And speaking of that, maybe you should go and try to get an S4 and, steal the sports model and fly it around.
Go cruising around in that, throwing our Whopper wrappers out the window. Yeah. No, I was making fun of the Whopper wrappers. I don't litter. But something else about the Greys, if they are not us from the future, what sort of balance do we have in universal nature to have something with a trunk, 2 arms, 2 legs, fingers, toes, a head, 2 eyes, 2 nostrils, a mouth, holes for ears, all in the same place that we do? What would the odds be? So is the universe just, is it all connected like that? Or would this be, would the religious experts say, okay, right there, that proves the existence of God because it's going with the same blueprint as what we were created by? So, I mean, I'm really surprised I haven't heard very many people at all bring that up, because it's a hell of a coincidence.
You're absolutely right, and I've always thought one possible reason could be that we had the DNA or, you could say embryos, whatever it be, seeded on each planet, and they may look differently because of their atmosphere and their temperatures, but like you said, 2 arms, 2 legs, 2 eyes, 2 holes for an ear, 2 nostrils, and 1 mouth. We don't find that in other creatures other than like monkeys or apes, things that are very closely related to our DNA. Look at what we were talking about earlier, for instance, like elephants, woolly mammoths, things like that. We don't really hear of anything like that, or a blue whale, or some sort of other creature that is coming to visit us.
No, even the people who talk about reptilians, you know what? They still have 2 arms, 2 legs, and are humanoid.
Same thing with the praying mantises. That's right.
Yeah. So I mean, it's either a hell of a coincidence, or the universe is put together, from the same building blocks, or there's a completely, different sort of, we're all related sort of answer.
Do you think that you've ever been taken?
That is, wow. Okay. I'm going to tell you 2 short stories. One, I covered a convention when I worked at a newspaper for a long time, and whenever anything paranormal popped up, see, I didn't get to write about it much when I worked at the newspaper, but anytime there was like a convention in the area, boom, I jumped on it. And I was interviewing a lady who purported to be psychic. I can complain about those later, but she was like, "You've been abducted. Do you want me to tell you about your experience?" And my answer was just a flat no. Because if she's right, I don't want to know. But apart from that, I was driving home from work one night from the newspaper, and I had a long drive home, and I hit this one spot that said my hometown was 5 miles away, and it was just straight flat road from here to there, and all of a sudden, "Gimme Shelter" popped on the radio, which is my favorite Rolling Stones song. And it's like 4 minutes and 26 seconds, I think. So 5 miles, 4 minutes, 26 seconds. I'm like, I can listen to my favorite Stones song all the way home. And all of a sudden, I kind of woke up from a road hypnosis. And I was going up a hill. And the reason that hit me was because I had my cruise control on. And the cruise control was dragging. So I tapped the brakes to get the cruise control off. And and I was really shocked because there weren't any hills between me and the town I was driving to. But here I was on one, and I had no idea where I was because I had driven into fog.
So do you think you had missing time, or maybe your vehicle was picked up and moved?
I don't know, but let me finish. I went up and down a couple of hills, and eventually I saw a light, and I pulled in, and it was a church that was about 5 miles on the other side of the town that I was going to. And I sat there in the church parking lot wondering, what the hell went on? And then I realized Gimme Shelter was still on. And it played for another minute and a half.
Frozen time. It almost looks like the time was stopped and, you progressed and the song still played on.
And I drove 10 miles. It's not like I sped because I had cruise control on at a certain speed, and I don't know what happened.
Let me see what else I have for you here. Oh, we talked about time travel a minute ago, about the craft. Do you think that it's possible that us humans have invented a way to either travel through time or even just to view time that is something that's being held in some secret laboratories that we're not being told?
It's absolutely possible. I always found it curious that some physicists have said that we're not going to see any time travelers until the time machine is invented. Because people often ask if time travel is possible, where are they? Where are the time travelers? But could we have invented? Yeah, I think absolutely we could have. We could have stumbled on something. When you mentioned that seeing time, I remember listening to Art talk about, he interviewed somebody about Father Ernetti's chronovisor that the Vatican allegedly had, and they could see into the past, and they witnessed, the crucifixion of Christ and things like that. Would we? That was proven to be a hoax, but I don't know. I'm just saying. We scientists have said that we can travel into the future, but we just don't know how to do it yet.
Very interesting that they mentioned traveling into the future but not into the past. And I'm glad you brought up chronovisor, Greek word chronos, time, a visor to view, right?
Yeah.
Now, again, a lot of the people talk about the craft creating, and I mentioned this earlier to you, even when we started this show, broadcasting, about the ability to create wormholes, Einstein-Rosen bridges. And it seems to me that, look at the last, say, 150 years of craft. 150 years ago, you had the airship mystery of the United States. Yep. I remember. It seems to me that ETs lie a lot, either to not scare us, but they're also keeping us in that time zone we're in. So, say 150 years ago, they said, "Oh, we're from further west," right? And they talked about it being a special new type of locomotive. Then you go back to the 50s, they talked about being from Venus, right?
Right.
Then you go, more recently than that, they talk about Zeta Reticuli. Most recently, they talk about the future. What do you say about that? Inconsistent story. Yet it's the same beings.
Well, it could be, and that's if they are extraterrestrials. They could, there's also speculation that has been, a hot topic in the past probably 10 years about them break off civilization is what people call it. Is there another group of people that are more technologically advanced than we are, like the Rich People's Club or something like that? Because it is interesting. You mentioned the airship, the Great Airship Wave of 1896. We had balloons, but we had nothing that could do what they did. The flying, the purposely. You could hear witnesses could hear engines. They could hear music coming from them. They had headlights. So, I mean, that was just ahead of something that we could do. I mean, we were able to do that a couple of decades later. The flying craft in the 1940s wasn't something that we could do. But you know what? We created some things that looked like that at the end of World War II and the beginning of, the 1950s, the flying wing type of craft. But and now, we had the rockets, the cigar shaped ships right as we were starting the space race started. And we had saucers, and now we've got the triangular black craft that hover. So everything that we've experienced has been something that we couldn't do at one point, but we did not too far in the future. So is somebody just messing with us? Staying one step ahead of us? I don't know. I think, but something out there, it's got a trickster element to it.
You're absolutely right. I think it's a combination. Are they messing with this, or are they keeping us safe, or are they just showing us technology because they're able to view us in different times, right? What if they're just showing us what we could understand because we're right around the corner from it? You mentioned the 50s, for instance, Venus and things like that. Well, that was right around the time, 10, 15, 20 years later, where we could see on Venus.
Right, yeah, and we knew, because we didn't know when George Adamski was saying that, he was taken up, aboard a ship with these hot Venusian babes.
Yeah.
We didn't know at the time what was underneath the clouds of Venus, and yeah, it wasn't that far in the future to where we did, and realized that that's not true. So I'm. People like Adamski and the whole contactee movement, I think a lot of these people were full of garbage. But something about some of the first things Adamski said, like a lot of these experiences or people who come up with some hypothesis that sounds great. They like the spotlight, and even though they did honestly experience something, then it dwindles into BS. So
to stay relevant, yeah.
Yeah, just to stay out there. Man, I hate to throw somebody like Hoagland under the bus, but man, Richard, I've enjoyed listening to him. But to me, it was the face on Mars and all the D&M pyramid and all that. That was good stuff. But then to stay relevant, he had to start coming up with other things. And anytime they sent pictures from the moon or Mars back, he was showing all these, machined parts and statues, and I'm just like, those are rocks. So I mean, there was a lot of that, I believe, with the contactee movement. But again, I think maybe some of these people had something real happen to them. Why they're being lied to, I don't know. Were these people from Venus? No, those people weren't from Venus, but they might not have been from someplace else. They might have been from here.
You're absolutely right. There's another question in the chat, but before I get to it, let me mention one more thing to you. You mentioned Adamski. Do you know who Timothy Good is, the researcher?
Timothy Good, yes.
In his last book, he wrote, I don't even have the book near me. I can't even tell you the title of it. But in the book, he talks about James Adamski, or George Adamski, having a U.S. ordnance card, which essentially was like a way to walk into the White House whenever he wanted, meet with the president. And there is a lot of photographs and documents with him meeting with high-level people, including going to the Vatican, meeting with the Pope. Something, this guy had clearly some sort of knowledge. Was he involved with the Manhattan Project that we weren't aware of? Something was important enough for the United States government to grant him that sort of card.
So just a guy who appears at UFO conventions talking about what happened to him doesn't get that he doesn't get to meet the president. He doesn't get to meet the Pope. He gets kept away from them. I didn't know about that. That's fascinating.
It is, isn't it? And that to me, because I honestly, I just didn't think that his claims were that credible. Very human looking, from Venus instead of Zeta Reticula. It just, to me, it seemed more fantasy than or science fiction than science. But then when I read about that and I saw the pictures that Timothy Good, had collected over the years, I had to start looking at that case with a whole new attitude. Anyhow, let me read this question for you. If the military had developed the ability to travel in time, how do you think they would use it? It's a hypothetical for you.
All right. If they were able to travel in time, what? Oh, backward or forward? How about both?
Let's try both. Exactly.
Let's try both. Well, in fact, I just I got a novel that's being published. I also write fiction. Novel that's being published this July, and it involves time travel and interdimensional travel, and basically what it's the government doing it. And what I'm saying, and I'm not giving many spoilers, is that they're in it to help themselves militarily. So I think if the government had that, they would be looking for a leg up.
Weaponizing it, right?
Yes. What could they get from the past? If they could go back and swipe, a bunch of velociraptors and turn them loose on a battlefield. That could,
like Jurassic World.
Right, something like that. I mean, in the future, going and getting advanced technology, but maybe going in the past would just be extra bodies to go shoot people. Yeah, I don't think they would be going, with too much. Man, I'm really, I really look bad at the government, but I don't think
you have good reason
to.
We definitely have good reason to look bad at our government.
I don't think they'd be going in it with trying to expand the body of knowledge for science's sake.
Here's a question from Nicholas Cashmore. How are Bigfoot so elusive? Will they reveal themselves to humanity?
One of the things that I kind of run into problems with people, because right now the thought is interdimensional Bigfoot. That we don't catch Bigfoot because Bigfoot walks in and out of interdimensional spaces, window areas, and that's why we don't find him, because he's in another dimension. I don't, that's explaining an unknown with an unknown. I look at Bigfoot right now until it's proven that it's an animal, in my opinion, and an extremely intelligent one, because it's most probably related to humans. Why don't we see them? People view the Earth as us having explored everything, except for the bottoms of the oceans. And that's absolutely wrong. There are great swaths of forest in the United States that people haven't been in.
Oh, God, just in the United States. And if you think about the whole entire world, I think there's so many forests, crevices, tunnels, whatever it be, natural formations on this planet, geological formations, or just trees, etc., that they could be hiding in. It's foolish for us to say we can see everything all the time. And let me add this to the mix. John Leir, I'm sure you know who John Leir is, right? He's a big proponent that Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Yeti, you mentioned, is it Moman, you said?
Momo.
That the reason why they're so elusive is that they have telepathy. And I never really considered that until he mentioned it. Then I started to realize that, well, it might make sense because, like you said, they come in and out of wormholes or dimensions, right? And why do we not ever find any carcasses? Sure, you could find footprints. You could even find hair samples, but you never find a dead Bigfoot. And the moment you start seeing one from a distance, they're gone.
Right. Well, let me. I'm going to touch on the telepathy really fast because I find this fascinating, because I had watched a movie I'd never heard of. Came out in the 50s. It's called The Abominable Snowman, and it starred Peter Cushing and Forrest Tucker, and they were going up into the Himalayas to look for Yeti. And the Yeti were telepathic. So why they came up with that back in the 50s, and then we're talking about it now, I don't know, but that's pretty interesting to me. But about the dead bodies, one, if these things are intelligent, which they've shown that they probably are, they might bury their bodies. They might carry them and dispose of them in a certain way. Or let's throw the forest out there. People don't run into dead bears. They don't run into dead deer or mountain lion, because the forest and the animals and insects take care of all of that. They can get rid of, just nature can get rid of a big corpse in hardly any time at all. And how they can hide from people, I spent time in the woods. Having grown up on a farm, we have lots of trees around. And there had been times to where I would walk within a few feet of a deer. I had no clue it was near me until I got spooked and took off. And of course,
because of how dense the forest was?
Well, and how well that they could hide. How well they could hide. There's a type of Bigfoot in New Hampshire called they're the gray demons, the gray something. I'm having a hard time remembering, but they're about 7 foot tall. They're gray. Their pelts are gray, and they're a lot narrower, a lot thinner than what we picture. The Harry and the Hendersons type Bigfoot, but people have witnessed them and said that they will stand next to a tree and they won't move, but the next second you won't see them because they blend in so well with the tree with camouflage. So animals in the forest can hide. They can disappear. I don't know why couldn't Bigfoot?
That's true. And when we look at the Himalayas, the Yeti is white, right? The hair is white, so it could blend in.
That's what we see on. That's what we saw on Scooby-Doo. But Yetis have dark fur.
Okay, so they're brown like Sasquatch or skunk ape. I see. But even brown, like you mentioned, within the trees, that, like you said, it could be 10 feet, 5 feet away from you, and unless it starts to move, if it's watching you and you don't catch it, you might walk by it, you might camp by it, and you might not see the damn thing.
Exactly. And I want to throw this out about Bigfoot. Because it worked with me the same with ghosts, because every culture on the planet has this in their belief system. In ancient Europe, including England, they had the wild man of the forest. In Russia, and they've got the Alma, or in some regions it's called the Almasty. In China, it's the Yiran. They've got the orang pindak in Malaysia. They've got the yowie in Australia. We've got Sasquatch. There's another short version of Sasquatch in South America. I can't remember the name, but every continent has Sasquatch in its belief system. So, I mean, for time immemorial. So, if this stuff has been spread around the globe and it's the same type of creature, why are people saying it's this thing doesn't or didn't at one point exist?
Very true, very true. Here's a question for you related to that. I hope I pronounced this properly. The question is, what about the theory that Bigfoot is actually Gigantopithecus from
Gigantopithecus? Yes, yeah. Gigantopithecus is supposedly a 10-foot tallish ape that lived during the Pliocene and Pleistocene era, and people speculate well, maybe Bigfoot crossed over on the Bering Strait land bridge along with animals and people. I'm absolutely fine with that, but one of the things, and I love science. Oh God, I love science. I love reading about new discoveries. But here's one of the downfalls I have is that teeth, I think it was 20-some teeth and a couple of jaw bones, are the only things that have been found of Gigantopithecus. And that's what the entire model of this ape was based on, was a couple of jaw bones and about 20 teeth. But there have been more evidence for Bigfoot than that, and still it's not, it's still considered a joke by science, which I find ridiculous.
The things that I have so many qualms with science being so close to this. A good friend of mine, Seth Shostak from the SETI Institute, he's
Right.
so close-minded upon what people are seeing. He just discounts every UFO sighting. Same way science discounts Bigfoot. It doesn't make sense. Do they really think there's millions of people on this planet that are just crazy seeing things? I don't think there's that many loony people out in the world that are completely normal, see something abnormal, and then report it and then go back to living a normal life without having any craziness in them.
Right, and most of the people who report these things, the UFOs, Bigfoot, whatever they see, have absolutely nothing to gain, and they have everything to lose. They have their credibility to lose with their family and their friends, maybe their employer, but they saw something that moved them so much that they talk about it, and they don't ever, profit financially from it. So, yeah, why would they do this?
What do you think about UFOs that were shown, for instance, or not shown, that were, well, yeah, I could say shown in old or ancient paintings, and also were talked about in ancient texts like the Bible?
Well, because I've heard a lot of things about the paintings, and art experts say, well, this is just how they depicted certain religious things, and well, that really looked like a person in a spaceship. Because there's one painting, I think it's got a painting of the Virgin Mary, and above in the sky, there's a guy inside what looks like Sputnik, which is kind of cool. But I think, especially when it comes to more primitive art, people drew what they saw.
Yes, yes.
So we have pictures that, I mean, look at some of the pictures that were carved down in Nazca. I mean, it looks like people with space helmets on. They're, okay. People, I've heard it explained. Well, that's just a depiction of a fisherman. Really? They had diving helmets? I didn't realize that, from thousands of years ago. I think a lot of the ancient art, again, depicts what they saw. There's lots of pictures of dinosaurs that were carved or painted into rock walls. When it comes to stories like in the Bible, we are putting our own interpretation on what these people saw thousands of years ago. However, they're putting their primitive interpretation on it. So, when Ezekiel's talking about the sound of great waters coming out of this storm,
Or the wheel within the wheel,
and
right?
the wheel within the wheel comes out, and this being, and he describes certain aspects of the being. Well, if this thing was wearing a spacesuit and it had, feet like a calf, well, maybe that's just what the shoes look like, and the crystal over its helmet. Well, that really kind of sounds like a space helmet. So, I personally think we've probably been visited. And I'm not all in on the, I'm not saying it's aliens, but it's alien stuff. But given how many planets we keep finding, and there are so many billions more just in our own, galaxy, the Milky Way galaxy, there have had to have been intelligent civilizations come and go, and why not visit here?
You mentioned that painting of the Virgin Mary with the guy that looked to be in Sputnik. It's ironic because I actually pulled that image up right now in the background too. My friend of mine's wife is a painter, and she told him, who conveyed to me, that nothing is done by accident. Everything has a purpose. So when you see an ancient painting that has somebody in the background, fairly small because they're very far in the background, with their hand up on their face, kind of like looking up, and they see a craft, that was put there on purpose to convey to us something that they were seeing. Eric von Daniken also told me, if going back to the couple thousand years ago, or even earlier than that, if you were one of the first people that you could read in your society, one of the aristocrats, right? if you did not write the truth or what the kings wanted you to write, which would have been a historical account, you would have been beheaded. And think about that, just logically makes sense. If I'm the only one out of a civilization of say 10,000 people or more, and I'm only a handful of people that can read and write, is the first thing I'm ever going to write a fictional story? Why? I would write something that I've seen, my life, my king, my pharaoh, whatever it be. I would write something that is true, not a fantasy book.
Right. Oh, yeah. I completely agree. I completely agree with that, and which also leads me back even farther. Let's go back further with um, yeah, the Greek legends, the Sumerian mythos. The Assyrians, the Hittites, all these people. When we get to Rome, all of these ancient legends have people coming from the sky. Oh, not just that, but Native American and Central and South American legends too. Always had people coming from the sky. And you know what? They always had knowledge. They always shared knowledge. A lot of it had to do with farming or simple technology. What happened with the Greek Titan Prometheus? He gave people fire. Why are we consider these stories, these histories, we consider them legends? Why
Mythology.
can't we
Yeah, you're right.
Why can't we consider them history instead of mythology? Maybe this stuff really happened.
And what's great about that is you have every civilization on Earth thousands of years ago, whether it be in ancient Greek, Egypt, South Africa, Central Africa, even Hawaii, the Samoan Islands, whatever it be. The point is they always talked about beings coming from the heavens above, giving them wisdom.
Every single one of them.
That's right. That's right. Here's a question that I bypassed because I didn't want to get off this topic, but I'm going to get to it here. Do you think Bigfoot survived the Ice Age 12,500 years ago?
Well, if this creature exists, and I think if any animal in cryptozoology does, there's more evidence for Bigfoot than there is anything else. Then I would say, he would be a perfect candidate for the Ice Age. In the Ice Age, we had the megafauna. We had the dire wolf. We had, the saber-toothed cat. All of these animals were bigger than what we have now. And, Bigfoot, I think, would be, again, a great candidate for that. Especially if we're saying, maybe he was Gigantopithecus, or there are people who speculate maybe Bigfoot's, they're just remnant, Neanderthals, which would have come from the Ice Age. I think they died out 40,000 years ago.
This would also first fit into what me and you were talking about before we started streaming, that the reason why you had dinosaurs or any ancient creature that was bigger than us was because the climate was differently. More oxygen, more heat, which allowed them to grow bigger.
Right. It's not just bigger, but amazingly big. If we had the same type, let me talk about. I just put my hands up in air quotes, so I'm sure everybody in the audience saw that. Living dinosaurs. I love this topic because, as we said with Bigfoot, there's so much of the earth that seriously has not been explored. There could be dinosaurs out there too that survived. There are things that survived. Turtles, crocodiles, the coelacanth. There could be all sorts of things. But the Mocalia mamimbe in the Congo, it has been talked about forever by the natives. It is a creature they describe as being the size of like a hippo or a little bit bigger. It's got a long tail, long neck, and a small head. And it dwells in the water, sometimes comes to land. And when Western people were talking with, with the natives that lived around this one lake, they, eventually when they came back, brought pictures of sauropod dinosaurs, and the natives were like, "That's it." This Apatosaurus was what they claimed to have seen, and as I said, it's about the same size that they claim of a hippo. Well, Apatosaurus species were freaking enormous, but they could have been smaller just because of the air, and the climate's not like it was back then, so that it can't grow as big. So I mean that, yeah, we could have Apatosauruses living in the Congo.
What's your take about Loch Ness and other creatures of that size that live there and other places that are described to be similar to the Loch Ness monster?
Well, when it comes to that, and there's another one in a lake in Sweden that actually.
There's also Lake Champlain, I believe, in Michigan too, right?
Oh no, it's in Lake Champlain. It is in, it borders, is it New Hampshire, and it's in New York, and I think it goes up to Canada. It's Lake Champlain is on the East Coast area, and it's huge. And yeah, Champ. All of these have been described as the same type of creature, which looks kind of like a plesiosaur, and Canada has the Ogopogo, which kind of fits in there as well. The only problem that science has with this is all these lakes are too cold.
Lakes usually are freshwater, not saltwater, right?
Generally, yes.
And are all these places that we just mentioned are freshwater? So the reason I'm getting at, do you think that these creatures thrive in freshwater and is why they live there as opposed to, say, the oceans?
Well, when it comes to some of the lakes, they don't have any access to the ocean. They could be something that got, a small breeding population got stuck in one of these large lakes at some point in the far past. With Loch Ness, there are, I believe, there are ways to get to the ocean. The ocean, I believe it connects. But all the other ones, are landlocked lakes. So, I mean, it could be like, just certain fish when there's a flood get trapped in ponds.
Let me ask you, going back to ETs, what's your take on alien implants? I personally used to think in the 80s, when I first heard about them, that they were used to track us, right? But our technology has gone up so much, I think it's foolish to think that all they do is track us. I think they could be tapped into all 5 of our senses. Another abductee has told me, Kathleen Martin actually, told me that she thinks that it's for downloads of information from them. There's just so many possibilities that we don't even know. And then you also have the cases of people that have implants removed and they're still being able to track. So I don't think they're even used for tracking at all. What do you think they're for?
Well, given if beings are coming from somewhere else, and if they have advanced enough technology to get here from there being either, another star system or the future, if they have the technology to do that, they would probably have the technology in these implants to, read all our vital signs, analyze our blood, maybe hear what we're thinking. Maybe they're trying to analyze, what use our emotions are, because these, especially the Greys seem to be, from reports, completely emotionless. Maybe there's, these implants could find out everything about us, and they're just analyzing us.
Exactly what I was mentioning, being tapped into our 5 senses, what we hear, see, touch, think, and actually more than 5 senses, 6 senses if they're tapping into what we're thinking too. It really opens to so many doors in that possibility. Another thing I've noticed when Dr. Roger Leir, I was present at the 16th and 17th removal before he passed away, and I remember that the day of the surgery, of the 17th surgery, every time they pinpointed where they were going to operate to remove this implant. The implant seemed to have a mind of its own because it moved when they cut into the person's leg to get
I
it.
remember hearing about that.
Right?
Yeah.
And then the other thing is it made things that were non-magnetic, like your bone, become magnetic. And then they also were sending signals that were consistent with being received in deep space. And when they were analyzed, they were not be able to cut without, with a regular, like a X-Acto knife or anything like that. They were that strong. And on top of that, they also had metals that the compositions could not be made not just on this earth, but this solar system. So it really opens the door to so much more. And I'm really sad that Dr. Roger Leir died, not just because he was a great friend and a great researcher, but I'm also sad that no one has picked up where he left off and continued to do this research. I don't know if anyone else was removing implants.
No, I don't either. And if people have these implants and we don't know where they came from, why wouldn't somebody, some scientists want to take them out? I mean, here you go. You want some proof? There's some that might be right there. Why don't you try and get rid of it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Literally right there.
Now, when it comes to implants, I interviewed a fellow named Vern a number of years ago, and he was telling me a story about growing up in this small town, and he, at a young age, had memories of what he called the night people. He would be told to go to bed by his folks, and he was restless, and he would just stare out the window, his bedroom window, and he said that there were people. He would see people outside, and they would be doing normal things. They'd be chatting over the backyard fence. They'd be having a barbecue. They'd be mowing the yard. They'd be pushing a baby carriage down the sidewalk. And he said the thing about them that didn't strike him as weird at the time was that they had eyes like a fish.
Oh, wrap around black almond eyes, huh?
Yeah, and he thought that was fascinating. Well, he did as an adult, but then he didn't. It didn't make any difference. But he said that he would watch them, and they would just again behave just like people would during the day, and he called them the night people, and because he figured they just did that stuff at night, and we were the day people because we did all our stuff during the day. And he said the last time he saw them is he was staring out his window and saw a kid out there playing with a ball, and the kid was playing by himself, and he wanted to go outside and play with this, fish-eyed night person child. So he tapped on the window, and all of a sudden everybody outside stopped and started looking at him, and they realized that he saw them, and they blacked out.
And do you think he was able to see like in a different realm or something like that?
That maybe it was something that I don't know, extraterrestrials were doing that maybe that we can't see in that light wave that they were existing in. I don't know, but the thing that brought this story to my mind was we were talking about implants, and he said later, much later, years later, he felt something. It was like a knot in his nose, and he couldn't breathe out of one nostril. So he got a handkerchief, and he blew, and he finally got something out of his nose. And he said it looked about the size of a capsule that you take, like a Tylenol gel cap or something like that. But it was silver. He said it looked like chrome, and he was he picked it up. And it felt, hard like metal, and he put it in the middle of his hand. And then all of a sudden, he said it looked like, what you see, mercury. Just turned to liquid, and then it melted and ran through his fingers, and it disappeared. And yeah, he had no idea what that was. But that, coupled with the sightings of the night people, man, that really makes me wonder if he was given an alien implant.
How old was he?
When he saw the night people, he I don't know, 6, 7, something like that.
You know, that's really interesting because I've noticed that children seem to be able to see. For instance, you hear a lot about children speaking to imaginary friends, and then you find out, well, they're not really speaking to imaginary friends. They're speaking to actual beings that adults can't see, but for some reason they can see.
Right. Yeah. And they can, kids at, they're taken to some haunted house by their parents, and they can see, the ghost of children or the ghost of animals, and their parents can't see them. So children are that they either can see something, they have some ability that we all had, but we lose when we get older, or maybe they just haven't been beaten down by society that says those things don't exist. Maybe some in the middle.
Now, through all the different types of ETs that people mention, we have the smaller grays, then you have the taller grays, then you have the praying mantis, like you have the lizard beings. I think there's the blue beings. There's so many different. I think the current count is like at least 60 different types of beings have come to visit us.
Don't leave out the Nordics.
Yeah, included in the 60, right? The human-looking ETs, the ones that are blonde, blue-eyed, and perfect muscled and all that, right?
Yep.
Do you think that they all coexist on one planet, or they're just all our galactic neighbors? They all live in their own part of the universe or multiverse and just have the ability to travel here?
Well, I mean, I doubt that they would have originated on the same planet because they look so different. Why would they have? It might be we might be looking at a Star Trek Galactic Federation sort of thing, or they might be all completely independent and to develop their technology all on their own on each individual world, or it could be that. As we talked about before, I mean, they're all have the same basic body shape as we do. The same, hands, feet, face, all of this. Maybe we were all seeded from the same comet that passed by. Maybe again, you throw religion in there, put there by the the same heavenly being, because in the Bible it says, Jesus said, my Father has a house with many rooms. Maybe that meant lots of planets out there. Who knows?
I tend to believe, from enough people that have been taking, that it seems to be like a galactic federation where they're not supposed to interact with us on a macro level until we're able to get to them. Of course, you hear a lot of people being taken, seeing them, etc. But those are all like on an individual basis, right? You don't really hear of like two continents seeing them at the same time, right? And so I've heard from enough people that have interacted with them that once we reach that science of being able to get to where they are, then we will be able to be invited to that galactic community. Now, let me also ask this of you: the shorter grays, the ones that don't have any sex organs, I'm starting to think, only recently have I started to think this, is that they might possibly AI, artificial intelligence. Do you think that's they're employing AI to do their menial tasks?
Well, yeah. I mean, if you were intelligent enough to have, to be able to travel across the galaxy to get here, why would you want to come yourself? Why would you want to come to this planet full of us dangerous monkeys? We're just, we're just right out of the trees, basically. We're dangerous. We like to, we hurt each other. Why would I want to put myself in that predicament? Why not, create these, androids or clones or whatever they are, program them how I want and let them do the butt probing.
Really? Yeah, literally. That's what it sounds like to me because, for instance, a lot of people that are taken say that there seems to be one taller gray on board ships that seems to be in control, that seems to have more empathy, that seems to care more, that seems to answer more questions, where you have the shorter grays, which have no sex organs, which are literally worker beings. They don't like to answer questions. They don't like to, they're just very robotic in their responses. And that shows to me that the taller gray is the one that is biological, 100% biological, where the other ones are engineered, biorobots, AIs.
Right. Yeah, I put some thought into that myself, and I'm leaning towards that too.
MJ12, what's your take on that?
No, I don't know. I mean, it's one of those things that I've gone back and forth on. I do believe most of the documents, people say they've proven that they're fraudulent, but I think there are some that were proven to be actual government documents. So I really don't know what to think of it.
Do you think presidents know what's going on? Do you think they have the clearance, the security clearance to be briefed on these? Because presidents are only in office up to 8 years. They're short term, as opposed to someone, say, in the agency or national security. When I say the agency, I mean the company, CIA, or even an unknown security agency where they're in there for 30, 40, 50 plus years, right?
Right.
So that's why I tend to think that maybe there was a time. I'm sure you heard the Eisenhower story where he met 3 sets of ETs here in California, currently at Edwards Air Force Base. At the time, it was known as Muroc Airfield. This was, I believe, in 1954. And Nixon was Eisenhower's VP, so he might have been in the know. But really, after Kennedy, I don't see, there wasn't enough people that talked about it in their memos. Okay, we had Jimmy Carter. You also had Ronald Reagan. They both reported what they saw. Once when Ronald Reagan was governor of California, Jimmy Carter before he became president, so both before they were president. And then when they became president, they, Bill Clinton, for instance, wanted to try to release this information unless that was only for show only and got nowhere. I tend to think that maybe an organization like MJ12 exists that holds all the information and all the people that work for them. It's so compartmentalized as to not know the whole story, and they don't brief the president.
I've heard that excuse before that the president's in office for such a short period of time compared to the people in the military or the other people in charge of agencies. But we had another. Like Reagan, you mentioned Reagan. Reagan allegedly, after a screening of what was it, Close Encounters, or it was an ET?
Both of them. He leaned over to Steven Spielberg, right?
Yeah, he leaned over to Spielberg and said, "You and I are the only ones in this room who know the truth," something like that.
And also, that was during when Steven Spielberg played ET for him in the White House. Apparently, when he was producing Close Encounters of the Third Kind a week before its release date, or its screening date before it hit theaters, obviously, he received a 26-page letter from the White House, which to him, he took it as, okay, well, clearly he's hitting on something that they think is high security and real. Otherwise, why would they be bothering it so much? And then, of course, 15 years later, whatever year it was when E.T. was revealed, he was, granted access into the White House to screen it. And like you said, Reagan said to him what he said, that, you have no idea how many, or like you said, me and you are the only people that know how true it really is.
Yeah. So what I think about the whole president, I really honestly think that they're briefed. I do, but they're also probably warned against talking about it. And the evidence that I have, this is just a personal feeling. I really don't have any evidence, but is watching like Obama and George W. Bush after they gotten out of office, they both appeared on, like Jimmy Kimmel and shows like that, and they've been asked that question, and they don't ever say no. There's no UFOs. They don't ever say no. They make a joke about it and skirt the question.
That's true. That's
so
true. They dodge the question. Yeah,
yeah.
And that's why they appear on comedy shows, like you said, Jimmy Kimmel.
Right, and so they're not going to, they don't have their feet to the fire. They don't have to answer the question. They make a joke about it, and it kind of gets brushed. Kind of get brushed under the rug. But so that kind of leads me to believe that they have been told. They have been told about it. They just also have been warned what the consequences might be to the American public and the world if they were to announce that, yes, ETs are real. I personally don't think that – I think we're ready. I think human beings as a whole are ready for that announcement. But it might mean something, completely more than what I'm thinking about.
I think you're absolutely right. My personal take on why they're not telling us is because the technology would be a game changer. I think that's the only reason, because we can handle the truth. We really can know that we find Goldilocks planets every day now. 20 years ago, they would point I believe, what was before the Kepler telescope? The Hubble telescope into an area, and they would see nothing. Now, when they point the Kepler telescope in the same place that the Hubble saw nothing, they find hundreds, if not thousands, of planets, and within those, they found the Goldilocks. Not too hot, not too cold, oxygen, water, and we know, based on what we have here on Earth, going to the bottom of the oceans, we found life forms that don't even need sunlight to survive. They are living off the heat from the fissures from the bottom of the ocean that are coming from the core.
Right, and that's why they speculate that maybe on some of the moons around what was it? There's one around Jupiter and one around Saturn that have oceans. They speculate that maybe they're the oceans do have life in them and are living like the ones that the creatures that we have down at the bottom depths, which would be really exciting.
A lot of presidents, not a lot. It's been more since Obama revealed it. Bill Clinton sort of kind of hinted at it but didn't confirm it. Hillary Clinton also talked about it when she was running in 2016. Area 51, it's become on the map now, is officially recognized, even though we know from a lot of people that have worked there, whether they worked at S4 or not, people that worked on, say, the Blackbird or the Stealth Bomber or even the U-2, that this base was in fact working since the 50s or 60s and is still in place now. Janet Airline, or the Janet flights, always flying from McCarran International Airport. What do you know about other bases on this planet?
Well, other than here in the U.S., like you'd mentioned S4, there's also allegedly one of these bases in Australia. It's an American base in Australia, out in the middle of nowhere. So anything literally could happen out there. Why would we know about any more of them? The U.S. probably has bases like that all over the place.
That's really interesting, because I haven't heard about the Australian one, but it doesn't surprise me. It makes perfect sense. But I have heard about a Russian base called Kapustin Yar.
All right. Well, yeah. And that's one of the things is that if we have these craft, yeah, Russia's got them. China has them. There's some stories that that Nazi Germany had their own Roswell, and they had something as well.
1936 Black Forest. That's right.
Yeah.
Now, how many crash and retrievals have you heard about? You just mentioned Russia, Nazi Germany. We know about Roswell. There's been a few in the United States. We know about Aurora, Texas.
Right.
Geez.
Aztec,
also in New Mexico, right?
Right. There was one between Sikeston and Cape Girardeau, Missouri.
That's right.
Back in 1941.
That's right. I remember Stan Friedman talked about that not too many years ago, within the last 10, 15 years of his life, because as you know, he passed away this past summer.
Yeah.
But
and I had lunch with him at a conference once. We were both speaking at the same conference, and I happened to have lunch with him. And I'm really sorry that Stan's gone, because he was a polite, knowledgeable, and gracious gentleman.
He was, and he was also talking about these when he was really getting a lot of hate from people like Philip Glass. He was talking about it when it was way more taboo than it is now.
Right? Yeah, absolutely was. And well, he's the guy who brought Roswell back from being from the obscure depths of history. What about there was one, the Kecksburg incident is another one.
That's right. Right. Geez, I'm trying to think of more and I'm blanking out. Preston Dennett wrote several books, and for instance, UFOs over California, UFOs over New York, New Mexico, Nevada, etc. I think there's 5 or 6 states that he's written books on, of his 20-some books that he's written so far, and he said, and so did Timothy Good said, that a conservative estimate, a very conservative estimate, is that we've had over 100 crashes on this planet. And I found that, wow, like that is way, way a higher number than I even thought possible. And then I thought, well, maybe what if the reason why they crash so often is because of the gravitational pull we have on this Earth? If they're flying using gravity, they enter our atmosphere, which is all of a sudden attracting them down, right? Would that mess up their ability to fly the way they normally would fly safely?
Well, but if these craft are designed to land on a planet, they would have had to have dealt with that on whatever planet they landed on to begin with or took off from. So would maybe the gravity here be heavier than what they're used to? Would it be lighter? Is that where they're having a problem? Would it be like us driving 80 miles an hour and all of a sudden hitting a gravel road? Maybe it's that kind of problem. I would think though. I don't know. Maybe it's the whatever we've got going on, radar, electrical storms. Maybe it's things that they don't have to deal with wherever they're from.
And you know what? That would also make sense. Some people talk about the Roswell crash occurred during a major thunderstorm, and that possibly it was hit by lightning, and that's what caused its crash. And that would also make sense. It would shut down the electrical systems if that's what they were using, and all of a sudden, if they lost power, what would they do? They would plunge into the ground.
Right, and it would really, really screw up their cable reception.
Yeah. Now, a lot of people recently have started to report on another craft that they say we have created on this planet that is using technology that we've recovered from ETs, which is the TR-3B. Have you heard about that?
No, I sure haven't. The TR-3B.
Yeah. There's a lot of videos on YouTube, and a lot of credible people have talked about this as the new stealth, the new U2 that they've been working on or have been using that has not been released to the public yet. We got lucky in the 80s. We were told about the Blackbird, and then a few years later we were told about the stealth bombers, but that was 32 years ago at this point.
And I was in college at the time in a town called Warrensburg, Missouri, which is not that many miles away from Whiteman Air Force Base, which is where the B-2 stealth bomber is stationed. And I was watching 60 Minutes, and they had a story about the stealth bomber. And a couple of days later, I was driving on a highway that was taking me really close to Whiteman Air Force Base, and I saw out of the corner of my eye something in the sky, and I had to pull over because it was just like a pencil drawing. And I couldn't hear anything. I got out of the car. I couldn't hear anything. And then it got bigger and bigger and bigger. And then this the bat plane flew over me. And I still didn't hear anything. And then it disappeared. And if I hadn't have seen that 60 Minutes, I thought the aliens they'd come to take me away. Because it was something that, I didn't think we would have had.
And you're absolutely right. It seems to me that we have been trying to emulate triangular craft or flying wings that we have seen come here from other places.
Well, and maybe that's what, I talked about, earlier when you brought up the airships and we talked about the different ships that people have seen over the decades that are just a little bit more in advance to what we're about ready to take, to invent ourselves. Well, maybe we have. Maybe that was us emulating things that we saw in the sky. Maybe a lot of those were. I mean, that's a point.
Now, ghosts. Some people think that ghosts can also possibly be ETs, or maybe once we pass away. I don't know how to explain that. But what's your take on that? Because I know a lot of people have asked me that to ask the proper authority, and you know more than one topic, so I figured to spring that on you.
Right. Like I mentioned with Bigfoot, is that every civilization that we know of on the planet has, I forgot Japan. They've got a Bigfoot type creature in their belief system. But ghosts are have been all over the planet for time immemorial. We've always talked about the spirits of our ancestors that came back. What are ghosts? I really think that ghosts, and I'm putting shadow people in this category as well, are a number of different things that just look the same. They could be, maybe. I really think. Oh God, I'm drinking. Oh geez, I can't believe this. I'm drawing a blank on the guy's name. The Mothman props. John Keel. John Keel was onto something when he suggested that there were window areas in certain places, which the veil, between dimensions is thinner. Maybe ghosts are people that we're seeing through that veil. Okay, that could be one. Two, the spirits of our dead ancestors. Very well. My wife, when my mom passed away from lung cancer, don't smoke out there, people. When my mom passed away, she was in hospice. And she said, Jason, don't worry about me. This is hours before she died. She said, don't worry about me. I'll be fine. And I said, Mom, I know you'll be fine. Just don't come back and tell me because you'll scare the shit out of me.
Yeah.
And, okay,
so
she promised.
She knew she was going to go in a few hours, literally?
Yeah. And she promised she wouldn't come back and tell me she was okay. But a couple of months later, she talked to my wife. So she came back to tell me she was okay, and she also kept her promise.
Not to scare you.
But she scared my wife.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You mentioned shadow beings, and this is actually an interesting point. When I interviewed Grant Wilson, I forget if he was the star of Ghost Hunters or Ghost Adventures, one of those two shows.
Ghost Hunters, yeah, he was a ghost hunter guy.
I asked him about shadow people, and he told me a really interesting question. That when he was on the Queen Mary and he was doing one of his TV shows, filming there, the ghosts there, that he asked the ghosts what they see us as, and he said that they see us as shadows. And I thought that was really interesting because if we're seeing them as shadows and they're seeing us as shadows, I mean, what are the odds of that? And that kind of would also make sense.
Right. I wrote a book back it was published in 2009 called Darkness Walks, and it's about shadow people. And I interviewed probably 250 people, not just people who experienced this, but religious experts, scientists, psychologists. I interviewed as many people as I could. And that's one of the conclusions that I came to, that shadow people are a number of different things. But one of the things they very well could be is that's all we can see of people in these other areas, in these other places, in these other, if you want to call them dimensions or times, but they are people, but all we can see is their shadow from where they are to where we are.
That would make sense if we're seeing into a veil of another dimension, or like you mentioned, another time or place, or yeah, time or place. I don't want to say manner, but time or place. That again, if we see them that way and they see us that way, another thing that Grant said was that was one of the reasons. Well, it's not a good idea to stand in a group of people in the middle of the room. Why would you expect a ghost to appear if they see a large bulb of a lot of people? They would be just as scared as we are scared of them.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's what whenever because I teach at a university, and I've taught a couple of classes, or one class I've taught a few different times called paranormal journalism, and that's one of the things that I've warned my students. I'm like, if you go to this place that's purportedly haunted, don't go. Don't a lot of you go. And if you go to different parts of the house, or wherever you are, because the ghosts aren't going to show up. There's too many of you. Yeah, I didn't say that they'd be scared of them, but yeah, they probably would be.
Sleep paralysis. Some people who are taken report that they're paralyzed before they're taken. Me, on the other hand, I get sleep paralysis all the time. I think it's a natural phenomenon for me because I've never been taken. At least if I have, I don't remember any of it in the last 40 years, right? But regardless, to me, I regularly often wake. My mind is awake, my eyes are open, but my body takes a few seconds to adjust before I can move. Yes, there's an element of fear because I can't quite move, but over the decades, I've learned to not be as fearful because I'm not seeing, shadows or giant eyes looking into me. Why do you think that people who have been abducted are being paralyzed?
Well, they're easier to take care of. I mean, they're easier to deal with. Let me throw the farm out there again. I grew up on a farm. We had cattle. We had these stock racks that we'd herd a cow into, or a steer, or whatever. We'd lock them in, so it would close in on their body and it would hold them tight. So we could give them vaccines, we could inoculate them, give them pills, which is really kind of gross. And we could do all sorts of these medical things we needed to make sure that our cattle were healthy. And when we got finished, we'd open up the rack and they'd go back out in the pasture. If we didn't have that, which basically paralyzed these animals, we couldn't have given them the inoculation. We couldn't have, given them the pill. We couldn't have, done whatever we needed to them. People are being abducted and being experimented on. That's their paralysis. The paralysis is their stock rack.
Interesting way to say it. There's another question here for you. This is about another topic that I'm going to ask it anyway. This is from Jax. He says, what about sounds from the other side? Wake about sounds from the other side? I think he's meaning what about sounds from the other side? I think that's what it says.
From ghosts or such. Wow, if ghosts, which are spirits, if they are spirits and if they exist, why don't we see them as much as we do? It very well could have something to do with the conservation of energy, and they only have so much energy to use. I think it would take an absolute ton of energy to appear as an apparition. I've talked to people who've reported only seeing a hand, or a body from the waist down walking, or just a foot, something like that. Wouldn't require as much energy. A shadow would require probably less energy, and hearing a voice would require even less. So I've heard a disembodied spirit before, and I think that these things, God, I'll just tell you this. I was at a guy's house. We were playing cards down in his basement. He'd built the house. It was on land that he was pretty sure never had a house on it before. We were in the basement playing cards and at a card table. There was nothing else in the basement because he hadn't fully moved in yet. And his name was Victor. And there was just 4 guys in this house. And from across the basement, in this concrete corner, a woman's voice said, "Victor." And we all finished playing that hand, didn't say a word. After we were done playing the hand, we were like looking at each other. Did you hear that? Yeah, I heard that. Did you hear that? Yeah, I heard that. Did it say Victor? Oh, yeah, it said Victor. So we got up and left Victor there at home alone the rest of the night. We weren't staying. But
yeah, I wouldn't either.
the point is that voice came out of nowhere, and it knew the name of the person who owned the house. So whatever it was that saw that either knew him or had been there watching enough to learn that was his name. So is it a ghost? Is it a demonic entity? Is it? I don't know.
Or is it both, right?
It could be both. It's at least something intelligent.
I have two questions that I ask people who generally study ghosts, like Grant Wilson and other people from both those shows. I'm going to ask you them in case you have any of these answers. Have you ever heard of anyone who's come across a ghost of an extraterrestrial? Because we've had crashes, right?
Right.
Presumably they're dead ETs around here. I would think that if they have spirits, who's to say that maybe somebody saw them?
Right. There was, I did, and it's a yes or a no. I did interview someone who saw a shadow being that he said looked like a gray alien. That was the shape of it. But that is the only time I've ever talked to somebody who has.
And I would take that as yes, actually. And here's the other question.
Wait a second. I want to stop right there. There was a team of people. I think Jim Mars was part of it. Jim Mars, who's also leftist.
Yeah, I miss him too.
Yeah, and he was with this team of people, and they were in Roswell, and there were, researchers like him, but there was also, I think, a psychic, and there was also a scientist, and there was just a group of people there to investigate the town and the area. And one of the things that they investigated was the hospital, because people who worked at the hospital reported seeing the ghost of ETs.
Interesting. Very interesting. At the hospital, huh?
Right.
The other question I have about ghosts, have you ever heard of anyone who was researching ghosts that had the ghost speaking to them in a dead language, say ancient Greek or Sumerian or something like that?
No.
I would wonder if the spirits would linger on for thousands of years, if they haven't crossed over to the other side. They may be, depending on the regional area where the ghosts appear, that if it has history, like here in the Americas, right, I would think that maybe somebody would have heard them speak in a Native American language, for instance.
Right. And this is always kind of, not bothered me, but interested me about ghost sightings. Is the one I saw, he could have been, died 20 years before, he could have died 2 weeks before, he could have died 50 years before. But on the East Coast, I hear a lot of stories, ghost stories of people, dressed like they're from the Revolutionary War period. From the South, people dressed like they're from the, or even in uniform of the Civil War period. In out west, more people that are like dressed like pioneers, ghosts that are dressed like pioneers. In England and other parts of Europe, it's people that are dressed from a few hundred years ago. Where are ghosts of Roman soldiers? Where are Aztec ghosts? Where are ghosts of Chinese warriors from 5,000 years ago? We only have ghosts showing up that are, have probably been dead for a few hundred years. Where are dinosaur ghosts? Where are these, because people see animal ghosts, all, cats and dogs all the time.
Wolves too, yeah.
Wolves too, yeah. Why not a Tyrannosaurus Rex thundering across Wyoming? People don't see those things.
You're absolutely right, and I've never actually considered that as far as dinosaurs from 65, 68, 100 million years ago, etc. But you're right, even 2,000 years ago, I have not heard of a single person talking about being in Japan and seeing an ancient samurai, or being in, the Roman, where the Roman Empire extended to from 2,000 years ago, 1,500 years ago, whatever the time period be, where they saw a Roman gladiator. You don't really hear that at all.
Right. Yeah. It's fairly. I mean, given the scope of and modern humans, that we've been around, we don't see cavemen. In Europe they don't see Neanderthals. I'm sure that they in Africa they don't see any of the Australopithecines or Homo erectus ghosts. No, it's all fairly modern stuff.
I wonder if because they have to be here for a certain period of time before they cross over. But then again, that wouldn't explain all of them because, I've talked to a few people who see dead people and they help them cross over, right? They help them meet whoever they need to meet, their spirit guide to get to the other side. But you're right. It literally goes back to a couple hundred years maximum. I think I've only spoken to one person who has seen a ghost from the period of like the Salem witch trial period, right? Era.
Yeah.
You don't really hear further back than that, which is kind of shocking because we have 4.5 billion years of life on this earth. Well, okay, 4.5 billion years ago, we didn't even have oxygen on this planet, but we've had, I think, 6 extinction level events.
5 or 6.
Yeah, the point is we have several million years between each that I would expect that there would be so many dead things in every inch of this earth that's habitable that something had to have died in every location. Where you're at right now, where I'm at right now, I'm not that far, for instance, from Los Angeles County Museum of Art, where the La Brea tar pits are. We know for a fact that in that tar we have woolly mammoths, you have saber-toothed tigers that were trapped in that tar, but you'd never hear about anyone seeing, for instance, the ghosts of them nearby.
Right. Right. Yeah, and there were I don't know if there are people living on Wrangel Island because it's way up there in Russia. It's in the north areas, North Sea there. But but woolly mammoths lived there. I think they died out when the pyramids were like 2,000 years old. So they fairly recent when it comes to the scope of history. I've never heard anything about the ghost of one of those pygmy woolly mammoths being seen. And again, they're more recent.
Now, back to talking about time travel. Do you think that the next step, and this is totally hypothetical based on all the knowledge you have and all the books you've written, which don't, at the end of in the next 15 minutes or so, I'm going to ask you about all your books and where people can find you, etc. Do you think the next step to our evolution is time travel, or is that something that we're not meant to play around with? Because I fear if there was an old Simpsons episode that I saw probably 20 years ago where Homer goes back and
with the toaster,
he messes with something like a tiny fly, and that changes everything for the current future, right? Or the current time period. I just fear that if we had the ability to go back and change something, that it might have such drastic effects of what we are now that it's probably not a good idea. Maybe it's limited to us viewing the past, not going into the past.
Well, I would be. Well, it depends on how you think of this. Right, that episode is, by the way, based on a Ray Bradbury short story that appeared in Playboy back in the 50s. I can't remember. The Big Game Hunt, I believe its name is. But the same thing happened. They were told, don't step off the trail, and this guy stepped on an insect, and it completely changed the future. But it really depends on how the universe really work. Because if you go back, and the big popular one is, go back and assassinate Hitler. Well, one of the trains of thought with time travel is if you go back in the past and change something, you create another timeline.
That's
And
actually true. And you know what? Dan Aykroyd was asked about that very same question. He said, well, if we went in back and killed Hitler, well, there would have been someone else that would have stepped into his place. I forgot the name he mentioned. It wasn't Goering. It was another. It wasn't Goebbels. The point
yeah,
I think that's absolutely the proper thing that's going to happen. Is it will create another timeline. I see
Heinrich Himmler. It was Himmler.
Himmler. There you
It was
go.
Himmler. Yeah.
I
He
see.
was actually he was smarter and a better tactician than Hitler was, so it would have ended up worse for the Allies.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. And you know what? He might have reached the nuclear bomb before us and might have devastated us. Now, I do see something in the chat about the butterfly effect. I'm also going to add in the Mandela effect. What's your take on those two effects? Do you think that we are undergoing a change in the past that's having a ripple effect now?
Well, yeah, with the butterfly effect, right? If you change one small thing, it could affect a lot of things, and I think that is extremely accurate because if you in fact, I listen to myself. Sometimes I think it's nuts, but if I'm driving and there are two ways to get home, and for some reason it pops in my head that I better go this one way, I do. Because if I went the other way, something bad might have happened and changed my life, and it would go on a completely different path. So I mean that's the butterfly effect. Any little thing can affect, have huge effects on not just your life but the world.
This was also shown in a movie, the first part with Ashton Kutcher, right?
It was called the butterfly effect. Yes.
Yeah,
And he kept going back in the past to fix things, and the future kept being different. I really, sometimes hate to say I really love this movie that Ashton Kutcher was in, but yeah, that one was a pretty good one.
I think it's good because it's accurate. Again, we were talking before we started streaming. I was just shooting the shit with you, having some fun talking about some interesting topics. I really think that's accurate because it's based in science fiction, where it's based in science.
That I think is has been the best science fiction that is based in real science. And some of our greatest science fiction writers, knew science. I mean, Isaac Asimov for one example, and Arthur C. Clarke for another. Though they were scientists, and people who are really knowledgeable with how things work. Can't remember the guy's name, but he wrote the book The Martian. They made a movie out of it.
Oh, you're talking about the movie that came out in the last 8 years, whatever it was, with
right,
Matt Damon?
Damon in it.
Yes.
Right, because the guy who wrote it knew all the science behind what he wrote about. That's why it turned out to be so compelling, and it felt real because the guy knew what he was talking about. So, I mean, I love science fiction that plays it really close like that.
Let me ask you about this. This is something that I had seen. Well, friends of mine told me about this. That was in the news, and then I went ahead and searched it. Did you know that Google recently announced that they have created a quantum computer?
Yes.
What do you think that is going to do for us as far as being a game changer? Because the only thing I heard that it did the day of when they tested it was they took a math problem that would have taken the world's most powerful supercomputer 10,000 years to solve, and this quantum computer solved it in under 200 seconds.
Yes.
What do you think? I mean, again, this is just, I guess, literally opinion. What do you think that can do for us?
One of, if it works out this way, one of the things that it could do is, since these computers, their quantum computer can think so much more quickly than computers that we have or that we can have, and if AI is something that doesn't kill us, like Skynet.
Yeah, right.
Right. It's limitless what these can do. Do we want to fly across the universe with warp drive? Well, these could possibly design it. Do we, really want to cure cancer? Oh, hell yes, we do. Well, maybe this quantum computer can figure it out, where we keep running into problems because it can work 10,000 times faster than we can. There is so much potential for something like this to change our lives for the better. I'm excited to hear about it and scared to death at the same time.
I think we're living in a very pivotal time, and you're absolutely right. I fear that we are playing with technologies that could wipe us out, and because I don't think we are. I don't want to say the word intelligent, because obviously we're intelligent enough to create some of these, unless we obviously inherited these inventions from ETs, like Colonel Philip Corso said, where he seeded these into technology. Responsibility is the word. I don't think we are responsible enough to play with certain technologies. Look at nuclear weapons. What's the first thing we did? Right, when we figured out how to
we blew things up.
We blew things up, exactly. We, instead of figuring out how to make a power plant or something positive, we figure out how to make a weapon of mass destruction. Right? And so us weaponizing everything and fighting within us, how can other intelligences look at us on this planet and say, hey, we don't want these people. These are idiots. We don't want them coming to our planet and blowing things up here, because if they can't even get along with each other, then how can we get them to get along with us who look totally different than them?
Right, we're dangerous animals. That's what we were talking before, and I'd mentioned the we were talking about the short grays being some sort of mechanism, some sort of biological mechanism, as opposed to a living, thinking, breathing, sentient being. Why would you want to come here with these wild animals throwing nuclear bombs and beating each other with sticks? When we can send our robots out. Yeah, I wouldn't want to come here. We're bad neighbors.
Yeah,
we're the trashy neighbors down the street with a car and the lawn on blocks.
That's right. We have emotions that run very, very high. We get angry very, very easily. And yeah, you're right. We're extremely dangerous animals. And I think the combination of all of that would be something that, if I was an alien that was looking at the evolution of humans, I would be scared shitless. I'd worry that, like you said, we're the bad neighbor. We are probably not just a danger to ourselves, which we are a danger to our neighbors and beyond.
Right. I would love to see if ET comes and reveals themselves. I would absolutely love to see one thing happen. And, all of us realize, you guys in the Middle East and, us here in America and, the different religions and, Russia and China, we're all the same. We're all people. They're the different ones. Let's not attack them, but let's just realize that we're one race.
That reminds me of what Ronald Reagan said at the UN. Do you remember that speech?
Yo, you know what? Yeah, I do. If we were faced with a threat from outside our planet, we would realize that we were one people. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's what it would take for us to stop all this infighting, because when we stop. If we really all stop to fight, okay, you believe in Islam, you're Christian. If we stop that fighting and we realize that we share the same damn DNA, why are we fighting instead of banding together and looking at other things that are intelligent, probably more intelligent than us in some cases? They look differently, but they also have 2 arms, 2 legs, a brain, etc. They're the ones that we should band together. And I don't think the word conspire is properly correct, but I think that would be a big step in them coming to reveal us.
Right. Yeah. I just, anything that brings peace between human beings across the world, I'm for.
Now, Jason, let me get a couple more things from you. First of all, let's talk about your books. Where can people find them? And, of course, where can people find you?
You can find both of those at my website, which is Jason Offutt, JASONOFFUTT.com. I got links to my books. I've got my blogs on my webpage. I'm on Twitter. I got a Twitter feed on my webpage, and if anybody needs to get a hold of me, I've got contact information on there as well. My books are also at Amazon and BarnesandNoble.com. And it's not just I don't just have books on the paranormal, but I've got a number of those. But I've got some science fiction novels, a couple of humor books, and I do a lot of. I have eclectic taste when it comes to writing.
Let me give a shout out to Tammy George. Tammy, thank you so much for your super chat. And I want to thank you for also joining me tonight and everyone else in the chat room who's been asking questions and even I've read all the comments between each other, between that you guys are writing to each other, and of course I'm paying attention to the questions. And again, I want to thank everyone who's been here tonight in the chat room and been listening to us. Remember, folks, I'm very easy to get a hold of. Pam Vrettenberg runs my Facebook, so if you want to get a hold of me, you could write a message to her through my Facebook, and she will copy that message and send it to me, or just tell me about it when I talk to her. And remember, at the moment, my Twitter was banned, which kind of ruins my uniformity of having the same name for everything. So let me work that out, and then once I figure that out, I will let you all know. Remember, I will be back tomorrow. And with that being said, I'm going to get back to my guest and ask him for one final statement before we go. Jason, thank you so much. I want you to hang by for a quick moment so I can thank you again off air. I'm going to leave you with the final word. If you had one final thing to tell everybody, what would it be?
Look outside what you've learned your entire life. Open your mind up. There are things out there in the world that we pass by every single day that we look at and don't really see. There's a lot of weird things in this world, and just start paying attention to that. It's a fun, weird, wacky place we live in, and I love exploring it.
Well said.